Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome to the show. Christian, how's it going?
Great. Had a very patriotic day.
Yeah, I see that you're already you're expressing the red in your face, right? Like you got a sunburn or something. Sweet. Oh yeah, your birthday's coming up, right? I got to get you something big.
Something.
Gonna turn this down.
Feel free to send us a birthday super chat if you want.
Yeah, right. Oh, nice.
Yeah, you've probably been on that many times.
But, no.
Oh, really? Have you ever been?
Not many.
Okay.
Hang on, I just want to. Just for those of y'all who are tuning in, let me know if you can see Christian. All right, he's coming in and out for me. I'm hoping that everybody else can see him, but I don't know. I don't see many people in the chat at all at the moment anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter much. But yes, so we got a fun one today. We're going to do election interference, election fraud, election manipulation, things of that nature. So say hi as you guys come in. Just want to make sure that I'm able to reach anyone at the moment. I'm not getting anyone at the second. But yeah, this will be fun. So I had a friend reach out to me not too long ago. A friend of mine who we have, these political chats from time to time. And he reached out and he wanted to tell me that Trump had stolen the 2024 election. Which I have to say, I find that particularly rich. But I don't want to steal our own thunder. I want to get into that a little bit later. But I had to lead with that because I was just like, when I heard this, I was like, "Are you serious? Are you serious right now?" Like I couldn't even think about it. All right, so I want to quote Trump. Because this is a quote that has been taken out of context a million times in the past, but it's something that I think bears on the topic today. Trump once said that a massive fraud of this type, and he was referring to, of course, the 2020 election, a massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules and regulations and articles, even those found in the Constitution of the United States. Now,
who said this?
This is Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, okay.
He was referring to, of course, the 2020 election and his allegations of fraudulent activity there. Now, of course, since that day, he's been misquoted a million times, and basically, when the liberals quote it, they only quote the very last part of that sentence, saying Trump said that we could do away with the Constitution, right? Not giving any context or explanation. And of course, he means that in the event that the democratic process has already broken down, the Constitution no longer serves a purpose. And he is correct, 100% correct. I'd back that up a million times out of a million. I would say the same thing myself. Because if you've got a Constitution that nobody lives by, then what good is it, right? Like, it doesn't matter, right? But it's an interesting quote that everybody takes out of context. Now, in the news recently, there have been 3 key events that have brought this topic to the forefront of our understanding. One is the grand jury, or the Department of Justice, just decided to launch an investigation into Leticia James. Leticia James, of course, who's one of the people who originally began her lawfare against Donald Trump to try to offset his election in 2020.
Well, she was in New York City, right? Not the one in Georgia. She was in New York City. Leticia James is correct.
She's the one that brought she's the attorney general that brought the allegations of fraud regarding Trump's misstatement of his financial valuation, like his portfolio or whatever. Hey, Janet, how you doing? Welcome aboard. And so that's one. So they launched an investigation into her, of course, and of course, the first thing that everybody is crying is lawfare, which again is rather rich.
If you're an attorney and this is the way that you have to prepare that you're going to be dealt with, is through the courts, through legal action.
Right. And we'll get into some of the hypocrisy here in a minute. But so that's event number 1. Event number 2 is that Texas, of course, is in the middle of a potential redistricting. They're trying their hardest anyway. Of course, the opposite side is, of course, trying their hardest to keep that from happening. So again, that bears on the election process. And then the last one, of course, is this claim that Trump stole the 2024 election.
Wow. So yeah, obviously we've had long heard claims from Clinton supporters that he stole 2016.
Right.
But 2024, all right, that's one that he won the popular vote. The count was way down. A lot of the anomalies that we'd seen in 2020 were gone, and now Trump was victorious. I hadn't heard anybody calling shenanigans on that.
Yeah, and this was a surprise. I mean, a surprise to me because I heard it not from one person but from two. And one person I can usually not that I'm not calling anybody out, but typically I hear these weird things from at least one person. This kind of weird thing because, like, people say stuff online all the time, and then almost invariably there's at least one Democrat friend of mine who will immediately grab something from online and then run with it before fact checking it. And by the way, that happens on the right too. Almost always, there's going to be at least somebody on each side that will grab a story, not fact check a second of it, and then just go whoop and just go straight to the press with it. But when I hear from two people, that's when I start like looking up myself. Like, are you serious? Like, let me check this out, and start punching things in. But let's start with Texas because I think Texas is maybe the easiest, the most, the simplest context to manage. So for those of you guys who are not familiar, Texas, of course, is in the middle of attempting to do a mid-decade redistrict. And this is very, very common for whoever's in power to just try to redraw the maps. And, because number one, populations shift, they change, move, people move, and population centers grow and things shift around. But two, of course, anytime somebody else comes to power, or if there's like any questions about the census or where, the numbers are coming from, obviously the person in power is going to try to attempt to maximize their value because that's just smart politics as far as I'm concerned. Now, for those of you who've been following the news, the Texas has to get a quorum to have this kind of special session. They have to have a certain number of people show up. And of course, the Democrats, not wanting that to happen, have fled. They've several people have just skedaddled and disappeared so that they can't be called to a vote. Now, Texas is special in that a lot of states have the quorum rule, but Texas is special in that they can force it, right? So they have a provision in their constitution where it says if people don't show up, you can make them show up. Like you can literally go arrest them and bring them to show up to force them to have the votes, right? Because you can't just obviously. It's not a typical tactic, but obviously, should it become a typical tactic, there's often, you have to have some fail-safe to keep people from just, prolonging it forever.
The gears of government cannot grind because you decide you don't want to show up for work, right? There has to be some, all right, professionalism, but because this is the government, right, there has to be some sort of provision put in. I understand.
Right. Exactly. So Governor Abbott has required the arrest of several of the representatives. He's even actually asked for some of them to be removed due to abandoning their post. I'm not sure exactly what the rules are on that. I mean, I know he can ask, but I don't know if
he can appoint them. He can call new elections.
He
can say that they've forfeited and call new elections for that, but yeah, he cannot appoint people like a senator or a United States representative. The state ones have to be elected.
So yeah, Lee asks abandoning. So yeah, if in Texas, if you're a representative and you're required to show up for quorum, they can force you to come, and if you flee the state to try to get out of them forcing you to come, then you can be deemed to have abandoned your post. Now, again, like I said, I don't know all the rules, but so it's an interesting little situation. Now, of course, eventually they have to come back and do their job someday. And of course, the game it's an interesting game that they're playing because of course they're saying that they're leaving to protest the fact that they're not addressing, for example, the Texas flood incident, which is ironic because you would think you wouldn't leave Texas to do that, but then there's also
they want to get notoriety. The press are talking about it. We're talking about it, right?
Right.
They want to raise it. Now, there's a lot of where you've talked about hypocrisy on this, and there's a lot of sort of whataboutism. When it comes to gerrymandering, right, both sides do it. Like Massachusetts. Look at Massachusetts. About 36% of people voted for Trump in that state. You know how many U.S. representatives? They have 9 U.S. representatives. You know how many of them are Republican? 0, right? Because they've gerrymandered that thing up to Harvard so that they don't have any power over that, right? And even Stephen Colbert had the governor of Illinois on his show, who was talking about this, and he had the guts to show him some of the districts in Illinois that are super bizarre. It looked like a scorpion and
isn't it like 14-1 in Illinois or something like that?
Well, but the districts are every bit as skiwampus as everything they complain about in North Carolina or whatever like that. So, or what Texas is trying to do. Now, the one issue though is that northern states can do this and nobody can say anything, but southern states haven't been able to do this because they can call that it's when they're doing it just because of Republicans and Democrats voting, but they take it that Democrats is shorthand for ethnic minorities, which are protected. And so anytime anyone in the South tries to do this, there's legal recourse. Now, the Supreme Court has been trying by allowing North Carolina's and other ones to go through. They think maybe that was necessary 60 years ago. It's not necessary now, right? And they're very skeptical of those claims, but the Democrats can still make them just because it slows down the process.
Right.
And they don't want these maps to be in place for the midterms, especially Crockett and other people that, it stands to benefit Republicans because Texas is a very Republican heavy area. But this type of thing happens on both sides, but they feel like they have a weapon to fight it in the South because there's special restrictions just for the South.
Right. Well, and not even just the South, but it's like I feel like it's like a catch-22 because Democrats on average are concentrated in urban centers, as are minorities, right? So it's like if you do anything that would like modify the seats so that Republicans do better, then you are almost by definition packing the urban centers, right? Like that's just how it works because of the way the populations in America are, right? And so like anytime anybody does anything that modifies the seats that would like assist Republicans in any way, you are like almost by definition placing people of color together in their urban center where they live, right? Like, and there's nothing you can do about that, right? And
it's because they vote 90% Democrat. If they voted like other people, about 50-50, then you could definitely say, well, this is racial segregation. But you're like, if it's political segregation, which is completely legal, constitutional, and cannot be blocked, that's fine. But it is kind of shorthand. Well, Texas is saying we're doing this for political gains, not for racial animus. Democrats are calling foul on that, but they have done the same things to try to sway midterm elections during Biden's campaign and during Obama's campaign. So there's a lot of whataboutism. They just think most of the people, right, aren't paying attention or have forgotten about those.
Of course.
And the recency bias, they'll think, oh, this is the first time this has ever happened. And,
Right. Yeah, right. Of course. Yeah. Like New York, I think New York has a commission, but it's just like incredibly Democrat leaning, and like California too. Like we all know what goes on there. So, right. Of course. So, and then, I'm just going to go out and say it. Like, of course, you can make these accusations of like racial discrimination for virtually anything on earth that's got anything to do with sociology. But the problem is if you can't definitively show that someone is doing something because of race, then there really isn't any like teeth behind that. You know, you could just say it, right? Because it happens to, and this is the game that the left plays all the time, because they don't actually go based on what someone's actual intent is. They just go by what the result is, right? And we talked about this a little bit last week. So if the result happens to produce something that has a racial disparity, whether for better or for worse, for whatever your group is, they're always just going to chant racism, right? Even if it has nothing to do with race, right? And like, to my mind, the only way that you would ever be able to like show that someone is doing this for racist reasons is if like they marginalized a color community, like a community of color, specifically so that they did worse, right? Like if I was a Republican and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to give up 2 seats just so I can keep, you know, Austin down. You know what I mean? Like just so I can keep San Antonio down. Then it would be like, okay, all right, now obviously you're, but if they're just like, we're going to get all the Republican seats we can get, then it's like, okay, yeah, duh, right? Duh, of course that's what you're going to do, right? And so the other side to this coin that people seem to forget when it comes to gerrymandering is that if you like look at any districts set in the nation, like anybody, any state, there is no such thing as like a neutral baseline. There's no such thing as a way of drawing a map that happens to be neutral. There's only going to be ways of drawing the map that either maximize partisan, like Republican benefits, maximize Democrat benefits, or that like try to split the difference. But nobody would ever try to split the difference because you either have Democrat or Republican rule. Like that third one is just never going to happen, right? Like if I'm Republican and I have power, there's no incentive whatsoever for me to be like, you know what, we could have 9 seats, but let's just have 6. You know, like this just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why people assume that that's gonna happen anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
and ultimately, the Democrats know this is a losing issue. So this is really just, you know,
right.
when we think about what the elites want, the elites want us to pay attention to it when the Republicans are in power and ignore it when the Democrats do it, because the media certainly won't report it. The media will keep it silent when the left does it, you know, but they'll get plenty of airspace and whataboutism when Republicans do it. But we should just see beyond that. This is just business as usual. Jefferson, from the very beginning of the United States, did this, and we can talk about it, barriers to entry for legislators and the things that you have to do to get your name on the ballot, right? Congressmen like to put in these things once they're in power to make it really hard for people to challenge them, and they really don't like to have the redistricts drawn where all of a sudden they might go from a non-competitive race to a very competitive one, right? And especially like California would notice, right, as people have been moving out of California, they've been losing population, they were losing seats. And so now they have to redraw the boundaries because seats are being lost, and now two Democrats that thought they would have to go against each other kind of stuff.
Right.
And one of the other things too is why they're calling for these Trump is calling for a new census that won't count illegal aliens.
Right.
Non-citizens, right? And for apportionment. And because by counting non-citizens, it heavily benefits border states. And so he's going to see, you know, if we can get a truer sense of where the citizens are, the people that vote.
Yeah, so I want to address something Aaron said just a few minutes ago. As part of my research today, I actually had AI go through and count each time that the parties have gerrymandered in the past. It's almost exactly even. Almost exactly even. So it's pretty close, of course, you know, and I'd have to get you the exact results. I'll post it afterwards. But yeah, it's pretty darn close. Like this is just one of the things where we were just talking about this right before you came in, though. When the North does it, right, when the Democrat-laden states do it, nobody mentions it because, right, like we just talked about Massachusetts, nobody mentions gerrymandering in Massachusetts because
or Illinois,
right, or Illinois, or New York, or California, or on and on and on and on. Every single state where one group has control and they have the legislative power to redistrict, that's what happens.
You got to vote. Your legislative elections matter, people, right? And the Republicans sensed on this and then had been pouring money into those legislature races and trying to. North Carolina, when I first moved here, I had a Democrat legislature, state legislature, which they'd had since going back to Roosevelt.
Like
and Jesse, it was the first time it was 2010 under Obama that finally switched.
Yeah.
Right. So like North Carolina's kind of a purple state, but when it switched hard. Right. So now they're one vote short of a veto-proof majority for Republicans, but we have a Democrat governor. So people sort of are comfortable with the balance there. In general, we think that as long as the governor is the right candidate, they'll vote for it. But
now one of the interesting things that I was asking, I was kind of trying to figure out what if I could come up with a neutral baseline, since there really isn't one, since there isn't like any. One of the unfortunate things though is that we've mentioned before is that if you were to one of the things is like contiguity of the counties and the zones, the communities, but that's like almost certain to pack the urban centers together. So I don't really know why that would be like
the baseline of the states that I have only one representative. right. It's the whole state. There's states you get two senators, but one representative, like Wyoming, South Dakota, kind of things like this. And so no gerrymandering there. Everybody feels happy about it. But or for the most part, if there's not the populations are overwhelmingly Republican and or Democrat or something like that, it's not seen as important. Or if it's a small state like Delaware, there's just not that much to carve up.
Which is, of course, this makes me wonder about Texas, because Texas is overwhelmingly Republican, right? And so, when it ends up overwhelmingly Republican, people are going to be surprised, and I'm like, why? Like, why? I mean, okay, we may edge Jasmine Crockett out, and that's it. I don't understand what the big deal is here. We knew Texas is going to be a red state, basically always, and unless something weird changes.
Well,
but
there was it was in our time, Ann Richards. They've had Democrat governors before, and things like that. And the Blue Dog Democrats had to pass away, but for now, right? That's why I think Beto O'Rourke. Do you remember Beto?
Totally.
You don't remember Beto? So he was this rock star Irish American person who ran for a senator and then governor of and trying to think that Texas was more blue than it was, and attracted a lot of money, and people felt like, oh, Texas could turn blue, and it's just not. It is manifestly very strongly opposed to not, right, because the Democratic Party doesn't really offer an alternative or policies that people want, right? Joe Biden's whole campaign, and really Kamala Harris's whole campaign, was, I'm not Donald Trump. Donald Trump's really unlikable. He's a bad guy. Vote against Donald Trump. Nobody wants to vote for Democratic policies. They could be convinced to vote against somebody they dislike.
Right. Yeah, evil orange man bad. Well, the other thing too, and this is neither here nor there, but America was founded on the concept of a majority rule. I know that seems passé now, because we're we've gotten to the point where we revere the minority. We revere the non, anybody who's marginalized. We're trying to push them to the forefront. Whereas there are times where it gets to the point where even though 97% of the nation, thinks one way, the 3% somehow get the bigger voice. And I'm like, if we're in a situation where we got a state and 70% of it wants X, and then you give it X, it's like, oh God, you're being terrible to the 30%. I'm like, no, you're doing what you have to do for the 70.
I will have a little bit of a mansplaining minute here.
Yeah.
Historically, so during the Constitutional Convention, right, there's what's called the Great Compromise.
Yep.
You know, the great compromise was that the big population centers were going to dominate. Big Philadelphia, right. New York, right, and the agriculture, the smaller places were. And the great compromise was to have the Senate just have 2 for everyone else, and the House be based on population, right? And so, and by having the bicameral legislature and the Senate and things, it kind of ensured that things move slowly. And so, yeah, minorities have an outfunded or outsized influence in American politics to slow things down. Right, the filibuster in the Senate, right? You've got to have 60 votes to right. bring something to closure. Things like that is all about so that the large populations can just raffle stomp. And the Electoral College. That's the Electoral College was part of that great compromise, right? Because without the Electoral College, right, you would just campaign in the big cities and that's it, right? That's all that would matter, right? But by having the Electoral College, right, these states get their voice and they're heard. And people complain because certain states like North Carolina, our vote matters more because we're a purple state, we're a swing state, right? And than states that are like California, right? Yeah. And so all the candidates come to North Carolina, they're very keyed into what North Carolina's things are. These were things that were won by, baked into the Constitution to give minorities the ability to slow things down and not be slammed by having a mobocracy or having things run too fast.
Right. All right, so let's move to Leticia James because this one's a fun one, right? So for those of you who don't recall her, back in 2023, she was part of the Lawfare that was the New York fraud case against Donald Trump. All right, and I will prove definitively that it was Lawfare here today for any doubters who may be out there. All right, so this is a civil fraud case where the alleged damages were that Donald Trump overstated his property values so that he could get more money and loan from the bank so that he could leverage his assets better, basically, so he can leverage them out more heavily. And meanwhile, the banks, should they grant this loan, which they did, would get more money and interest. Right. So this is one of the weird cases where normally in a civil case, you'd have a plaintiff and a defendant, and the plaintiff would be the person who received the damage, who would have been the one who had pain or suffering or fiscal loss caused. Now, New York has a special law that allows the AG to investigate crimes like civil crimes like this. So in this case, the AG stepped in claiming that even though neither Donald Trump nor the banks had any problem with this deal,
they got paid back, right? They got all their money back, right? Yeah,
they got all their money plus some, plus plenty. They made a lot more money loaning out more than they would had Trump valued his property at whatever Leticia James assumed he should value his property at, right? So now here's the kicker, and I'm just going to throw this all out there, put all my cards on the table. In any real estate deal ever, there's 2 sides, not just one, right? So it's not just I go to the bank and tell the bank, this is what my house is worth. Would you give me a loan? No. The bank will also say, all right, we're going to need to verify that. And the banks did in each and every single case that Donald Trump was assigned a fraud count in. Each and every single case, they did due diligence. They checked over his fiscal records. They even ordered independent appraisals, which means if they both at that point agree that Donald Trump is not overstating his value, there's only 2 options left. Either they're complicit fraud, or they're just so horribly negligent that they would also still be liable for that same fraud, which means...
Like incompetent underwriting by the banks is Donald Trump's fault?
Yeah, well, right. So, what that means is, at that point, after Leticia James assumes that Donald Trump is committing fraud, she would then also be duty and honor bound to also investigate and prosecute the banks, which he did not do. Which means that's lawfare. She selectively targeted Trump and only Trump for political reasons. Now,
well, yeah.
Now, when they do it back, I'm sorry, I don't have any sympathy for you. I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want lawfare to become the norm.
Well, this is right. So, I have mixed feelings, and you have mixed feelings about Donald Trump, but this is one of the attributes that I admire the most in him. He's not going to be cowed and shamed by this type of shenanigans, especially when done by elites. Right. He's going to respond back. He's going to fight like a bulldog, right? And he's not. They're hoping that they can shame him out of the public sphere, that he won't, by convicting him of this, that he'll be too ashamed and too embarrassed to run for office, right? And Donald Trump doesn't have that bone in his body. This is a bad read, right? And reading somebody, this is a bad read by the Democrats and by Leticia James, and a waste of her prosecutorial power and budget. She should have had spent her time on other cases that affected were actual malfeasance and lawbreaking. This, focusing on this is not in the service of America or New York State.
Right. Well, I guess it is in the case of New York because she got like $400 million for it. But under normal circumstances, it shouldn't have been. And this is the thing, right? Like when this case, which is so obviously and blatantly lawfare, goes and Trump still ends up like having to be found liable. I don't understand how anybody can look at this with an objective mind and then think that lawfare isn't levied against Trump all the time. Now, I'm what I would consider to be a relatively fair-minded person, right? Now, I will freely tell you that in all the cases against Donald Trump, he's guilty of some, he's not guilty of others, right? Unfortunately, I rarely meet that person that agrees with me. I almost always meet people that think he's guilty of every single one or not guilty of every single one. And that's just not mathematically likely, right? Like chances are, if you got 88 cases against you, you're gonna probably guilty of
where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, so when you're a high net worth individual and you're doing things at high leverage and on the edge, right? You're gonna provoke. People are going to deal with you in the courts and try to pose you, even if it's just to slow down. Like they know they're going to lose, but filing a court case slows down what you're going to achieve or what you want to accomplish.
Right. Especially when you're both a business figure and a political figure, of course. Yeah, and I mean, we knew that this was going to go down. I mean, and that's fine. That's fine. There's going to be some of that, but then when it happens back, and she's crying like, "Oh, woe is me!" I'm like, "Really?
It's crocodile tears." Yeah.
Cry me a river, like, good Lord. And that I want to be clear because I'm a principled person. I'm not for lawfare. Yeah. I'm not for it in any case, right? Whether this is lawfare or not, kind of still remains to be seen. It's still very, very new. I think everybody's very, very quick to call it lawfare. And I mean, don't get me wrong, because it may have the appearance of impropriety, but I think it's way too new of a case for us to really know anything about this case yet. I do know that she probably also committed mortgage fraud on the side, which is particularly ironic. But that's just funny.
Filing lawsuits because you dislike someone or disagree with, a benefit they got is the nuclear option of social interaction, and it destroys personal relationships and now among elites they'll do it. Right, she works in that and she wants to do this. This is one of the problems with elites, especially, and why Trump has such contempt of them, why we have such contempt of them, is anybody who's, cavalier about destroying somebody's life through lawsuits is somebody that we should despise. Right?
Yeah. Right. So, this is kind of a side note. We did one on, people are talking about Epstein stuff in chat, but we did one on that. I encourage you guys to go watch it. But yeah, out of all the cases, that's one that I think would have a particularly high burden of proof. You'd need to show me 100% that someone, trafficked kids before I would just freely start accusing them of it. Of course, remember that civil and criminal courts have different burdens of proof, right? One requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The other only requires a preponderance of evidence, right? And so, whereas I might be quicker to assign liability in a civil case, as our law system would require, but I would not be so quick to say somebody's a pedophile unless I was 100% sure. I would need to see the evidence in front of my face. It couldn't just be like this nebulous, oh, well, he once knew a guy who once was, yeah, no, sorry. But anyway, I don't want to get derailed from this because this is mostly about election interference. Now, I think that Leticia did her best to try to take away the money in the election for the 2024 election to try to like keep Donald Trump tied up in court so he couldn't campaign. So that basically to thwart him at every turn.
His fundraising was by far what was, what, a third or a fifth of what Kamala Harris spent?
Oh yeah. Well, that and right, and not even to mention the fact that like while he's trying to get money for his campaign and like give it life, breathe fire into it, people are like trying to sue him at every turn they can to just try to like just snatch just little pieces of him, of his campaign funding away. Because one good thing, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't like money in politics in general, but I think it's just a fact of life that if you're rich and you're trying to run for political office, chances are at some point you're probably going to start funding your own campaign to a certain extent, either to shore up little things here and there or to pay like little extra expenses that you hadn't originally thought of. But anyway, so yeah, we knew Trump was going to use some of his own money, which he did. And then, meanwhile, people are just trying to like pick like little piranhas, just try to pick at every little thing they can do, try to keep him tied up in court every step of the way. And she was definitely part of it. And now she's not running for office right now. And, there isn't seemingly any reasonable reason to have lawfare against her except for revenge, which is a viable reason for Trump. Let's not kid ourselves. But you'd still have to prove it, right? You'd still have to show us that there isn't anything there for her to have, committed fraud on. And I think the case is too new for that. So we'll see. We'll see as this progresses if it is in fact lawfare or if it's just revenge. We'll find out. But my thing is, don't dish it out if you can't take it, right? Like if you're gonna fire it out and then when it comes back at you, go, oh,
and you should expect Trump. When you're an elite and you go after Trump, he's going to come back after you.
Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't pick on little guys, but if you're up there, you're an AG, you should know better. I think I changed the subject a little bit, but it has to do with elections. It seems like the Republicans come around on two things they were usually against. Mm-hmm. They've got a testimony now. They like early voting.
Okay.
They think it can be something that can help them, can be an asset to them. Right. And so before they saw that it was only helping Democrats, they opposed it. They've come around on that, right? And there's some who are thinking that as long as we're adequately prepared, we can even make mail-in ballot voting work for us too.
Oh yeah.
We're still not quite there yet, but it was mainly the Democrats had a lead on ballot voting. We needed to catch up. That we were so opposed to it. So we'll see, what was called election interference, maybe it's just the other side is more organized in those areas than we are. Once you get to parity, then it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's the like the classic pattern between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats are always a little bit ahead of the game, right? That's the whole progressive model, right? And then the Republicans are like, what do you mean you have full control of the media? We want some market share, like, what do you mean you do all the ballot harvesting? We want it, so eventually, they catch up, but it takes some time. And of course, after they realize that they can use the same tools. But of course, part of this game too is that, I think Republicans and this, they shoot themselves in the foot sometimes with their, there's this quiet dignity that they like to project, right? They're like, well, we do things by the old dignified manner, and then it's like they get blown out, because they're not using all the cheats and the tricks, and it's like, oh, I guess we're gonna have to pick some of that stuff up, right? I feel bad for them sometimes. They're like, no, we wouldn't ballot harvest. That's unfair. Right, it's not against the rules in many states, but it's unfair, right? And then they get blown out by it. They're like, oh yeah, I guess we need to. We're going to need to do that too. But
essentially, we as long as we're prepared for it, we can make it fair. But yeah.
So Molly, I see you say this conversation is so shallow. Why don't you deepen it for us? What facets of election interference would you, in particular, like to discuss? And we'll add that to the ring. Meanwhile, let's talk about the claims that Trump stole the 2024 election, because I think this is just strikes me as particularly rich because I after 4 years of nothing but there is zero evidence that there's ever widespread fraud in an election, and 4 years of those Dominion voting machines can never be hacked. And after 4 years of all, like, I just had so much of this shoved down my throat. And I'm just so clear, I was never even one of the guys who thought that, like, I guess the way people say it is like Trump won the 2020 election. I don't think that that's even what they mean when they say it. What they mean is that Trump should have won, like, or that he would have won if it hadn't gotten stolen, right? Not that he actually won, because we all know what history is, right?
Mhm.
But, like, that's what they mean. They mean that he ought to have won, right?
Mhm.
But I wasn't even one of them. I was one of those that was like, well, it was probably fraud, but it probably didn't overturn the election results. Probably wasn't enough, right? But I was like, I was always split in this middle of the road. But meanwhile, every time I would say, well, you know, there was all this weird stuff happening, and people were like, oh, no evidence whatsoever. And now it's like, yeah, Trump hacked the Dominion voting machines. He used Elon Musk to do it. I'm like, what? Like, what?
Yeah.
I love it. And so, all right. So first, I want to address the difference between evidence and proof, right? Because this is important when we talk about this kind of stuff, right?
They ignore that Kamala Harris was like the worst candidate. And
Yeah,
like,
right. And they ignore that. Yeah, Biden ran the whole campaign from his basement and was like a historically low approval, vice president and low approval president, and still got the most votes ever. But anyway, there's a lot of. We'll discuss some of the discrepancies here in a second. But what I do want to discuss is the difference between evidence and proof, because that, again, like I said, this was a mantra from the Democrats: was there's zero evidence of any widespread election fraud in 2020. Now, I want to be clear that those two words are different things. There's lots of evidence of it. There just wasn't any proof of it, right? Just like I have the same, like, conflation of words when I talk about, like, whether or not, God is real or Jesus Christ existed. Yeah. I'm like, there's plenty of evidence. It's just not enough to convince you. It's just not enough to convince a lot of people because it's not proof, right? Yeah. You're not watching it you're not watching Jesus Christ walk out of the tomb on a Panasonic video camera. That's not the same thing as there's no evidence. There's evidence. Yeah. Evidence up the wazoo, right? And there was evidence up the wazoo for the 2020 election. It's just not enough to prove it, right? And so that's the difference, right? And we need to make sure that we're looking for evidence and not for proof if we say the word evidence, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my piece on that. Now, I do want to talk about, like, the claims specific. So the specific claim is that it was in an article from Substack, and they reference this guy who is a former CIA agent, supposedly, allegedly, is a former CIA
allegedly,
right. Allegedly former CIA agent named Adam Zarnowski, who is named as a whistleblower, who claimed that he had firsthand knowledge of a report from the NSA that was buried, that did an audit of the 2024 election, and supposedly, in reality, like, Tim and Kamala won big, right? But just was this audit was buried. So literally, it's a alleged report of an alleged person who I can't even, by the way, verify exists, whose employment record wasn't able to be verified by Snopes, about an alleged report which I can't find, right? In the NSA, I see the. Sorry, I apologize. I see the report, like the report from the NSA from, like, the April to September zone that did discuss some internal investigations. None of them were an audit of the election, right? And so I dug for this just because I wanted to give it its due attention, because I heard it from two different Democrat friends of mine. I'm like, all right, let me start digging. Let me do my due diligence, and I couldn't find a piece of evidence to back this up. Not a shred, other than
the party that's for show your ID when you vote. is not for putting in fake votes. We want one person, one vote. Vote with your ID. Have our elections. Elections have integrity, right? There've been enough shenanigans about President Kennedy's election and about people using dead candidates. Somebody going around in their neighborhoods in Philadelphia and finding people that don't feel like voting and say, "Oh, I'll go vote for you." Run down, and stuff like that. Where we say, no, you show your ID, everybody, you show up the polls, you vote, nobody votes for you, votes for you, and dead people don't get to vote. We have to trust that this is the will of the people. That's the ultimate, right?
To an extent,
That's the ultimate endower of authority and legitimacy. And so obviously calling that into question, right? The left will never accept Donald Trump's legitimacy.
Of course.
Right?
Sure.
Right. Yeah. And they're like, you can't normalize Donald Trump, right? And the press has tried to, and some elites, right? Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, has tried to normalize and try to bring down like the outright vitriol and TDS from the media and say, look, Trump is president. He's legitimately president. Let's report on him like a legitimate president, not like anything else. Now, obviously, he's doing policies that the left doesn't want, but that doesn't make him an illegitimate president.
Right. And so I dug into this. There is just so I can be as fair as I can. There's one other facet that I looked into, and that was that there's a place called what is it called? Election Truth Alliance or something like that. It's like a place that supposedly investigates elections or something like that, and they seem to. I haven't finished looking at it because it's a lot of statistics, and my statistics classes are like 20 years old. So I actually am having a friend of mine help look at it with me so that I, to give it a refresher. But from what I've seen, although they seem to claim that Donald Trump had, like, the 2024 election had a lot of, like, statistical variance and discrepancies, nothing that I saw indicates what I would call fraud. Now, one thing that
there's a statistical term about significance, whether it was significant at all. Right, there's going to be outliers or certain things, but were they significant or were they insignificant?
Well, they were what I see, they were maybe significant, but the problem is their variance for error was way too high. Partially, that's part of the problem. The other problem, though, too, is that Donald Trump is just a known statistical anomaly. And this is one of the reasons that I didn't give the original claims in 2020 as much credibility as some did. Right? It's not that I didn't notice the same discrepancies, but the thing is that just Trump is just weird, right? And you and I have talked on this channel of how he kind of
not a normal politician. He doesn't, and his support doesn't comport to normal ebbs and flows of politics. Yeah.
Right. And you and I've mentioned many times how, like, the old age was like Republicans conservative, Democrats liberal, and now it's kind of like Republicans are populist and Democrats are anti-populist, right? And so, like, that's a new poll, right? Like, and that the voting is going to show that. It's going to show that he's reaching new demographics and not the old ones, right? And, like, that's just part of the game for him, and that's going to be one of the reasons why everybody's going to see all those anomalies. But that having been said, I do want to discuss some of the anomalies of the 2020 election, just so that, one, I give them their due credit, and number two, people know that I've looked at it, and number three, so that those who say that there's zero evidence realize that there is not zero evidence. There's actually a considerable amount of evidence to show these discrepancies. One is we've had 19 bellwether counties that since 1952 to 2016 always voted for the right candidate, always voted with zero discrepancies from 1952 to 2016 until Donald Trump. They never were wrong. All 19 of them voted the exact person that won. Now, in 2016, 18 out of the 19, in 2020, 18 out of the 19 said that Donald Trump was the winner. Only one said that Joe Biden was the winner out of our bellwether counties, right? And that's why we call them.
In 2016.
In 2020. In 2016,
2020. Yeah.
In 2016 there were some discrepancies, but not from those 19. Those 19
Okay,
bellwether counties, that's why we call them bellwether counties, because they've always been right. And so in 2020, all of a sudden, and without warning, 18/19ths were wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Now, again, this is when I go through these guys, understand that just because there's a discrepancy doesn't mean that that was indication of a fraud, right? It's just one of those things where, like, any one of these can be hand waved away. Any two of them, maybe. Any four of them. But, like, after you go 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it starts to, like, if you don't at least raise your eyebrow, you're not critical thinking, right? You're just, like,
you're carrying water. Yeah, you're willfully putting your head in the sand. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, one of the classic things that people say is that, Trump filed 1 million court cases and lost them all. That's not technically true. Almost all of his court cases were dismissed on standing, not on merit. There were only a few that were addressed on merit, one of which he won. They actually retried in Pennsylvania, and in Fulton County, they ordered damages because the county assumed the county ruled that they did not actually properly investigate the Dominion voting machines as they claimed. All right, so that was a victory, believe it or not. Now, people say that Trump lost every single case. Not accurate, right? One discrepancy is that in many of the states, and this is a big one. This is the one that my father will, like, stake his life on. This is one he says, like, look, this is why Trump should have won, right? Is in many states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, and Nevada, there were last-minute changes by the judiciary about the way that votes were counted, or allowing votes that would not normally have been counted, a lot of times with absentee voters, right? And they did not have the constitutional right to do so. It was the legislature's clear constitutional duty in those
Secretary of State, right?
Yeah, or the Secretary of State in a different, in one of the cases. But yes, so these are cases where, like, straight up broke the rules to change what would have been the normal vote. And now, and again, we talked about this a little last week, where, like, the Republican side is often very principled, and the Democrat side is more results driven, right? And so this is just one of many situations where we have this principle to abide by the state constitutions, but the Democrats are willing to just throw that out to accomplish the result they want. And that's, like, they'll say, well, because of COVID, we're able to just do away with the principle. And that's just not okay with me. Now, it might be okay with some people.
Yeah.
Right. It might be okay with some people, but, like, I'm just not okay with just bending my principles simply because there's an anomaly, a weird situation in play. That's why they're called principles. Like, if I only cared about freedom of speech until it was complicated, until it was difficult,
until it was bad for you.
Yeah, then it's not freedom of speech, right? Like, that, you just stick to your principle. That's why you call it a principle, right? Now, there were situations where there were heavy allegations of ballot harvesting, where ballot harvesting was illegal. And in every single case of the ones that were focused on, the ones that were in the battleground states, in every single case, the allegations were proven true. They were just ruled out on standing, or ruled that it wasn't sufficient, right? But proven true, right? Like, it's one of those things where people say, no, this didn't happen. No, it happened, and it's verifiable that it happened. It's just not verifiable that it was big enough to cause the difference between one result and another, right? But I want to let people know that Trump only lost the entire election by 45,000 votes. 45,000 votes to tie, 62 to win. So, like, that is not a big change, right? Like, even small differences, small discrepancies can make the difference between one election and, and another result, right? Now, here's the big one, and this is the biggest piece of evidence. This is what I would call true evidence. This is, like, verifiable evidence that's not just conjecture. There was a study, a peer-reviewed study done by John Lott Jr. that was published in Public Choice Journal, right? And this study basically tracked demographics over one county to others, right? And what it did was basically took specifically the battleground states, and a lot of times there are situations where, like, you can go back years and years of history, and you'll see that, like, districts vote the same basically every time, right? And you can see that one district and another district who are like neighboring districts often have the exact same profile, the exact same number of registered Republicans, registered Democrats, exact same number of men, women, number, people of color, people, like on and on and on. They basically have the exact same profile and they voted exactly the same. But in 2020, he showed that there were at least 368,000 anomalies where, even though these were like neighboring districts, sometimes only separated by a street, like one side of the street to the other, and even though it was just the same community separated by a street, because one place was counted in a different place, had a wildly different total. Like, wildly different. Now, again, any one of these, you could probably just say, right? Like, okay, not 18 out of 19 bellwether counties, whatever. Trump's weird. He might not have, like he might have changed some things up, right? Any one of these, the peer-reviewed study, maybe that can happen. These are weird times. But like, you go down the list and it's like 6, 7, 8, 9 discrepancies, and it's like, wow. And the fact that like, these late night ballots were showing up, the fact that there were people who are paid these are observers that are supposed to observe these ballots, and they're like, they won't let me observe these. They're keeping me from observing. They're separating me because of COVID. They're blocking me from this zone. Like, there's just, when after a certain number of discrepancies, if you don't at least raise your eyebrow, you are carrying water. To use Christian's quote, you are carrying water for somebody. And I'd like to say I'm fair-handed, I'm even-handed. I will say that no matter who's winning, right? No matter who ended up on top. But like, if you've got that many discrepancies and you can't at least admit that 2020 was an anomaly, that it was a weird election.
Yeah, you're biased for your side. Yeah, you're putting your head in your sand for that. And so, yeah, but I think 2024, right? Those anomalies went away, right? The counts went back down to normal. Like, the people were watching, they weren't going to let that stuff happen, and Donald Trump won. But I honestly think, and the having the 4 years off was good, helped Donald Trump be a better president. But we did have to go through 4 terrible years of the Biden presidency.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, JC said Republicans with principles and Trump is fine. Well, yeah, like I said, on average, and a better, I'll correct myself. A better word for it is conservatives with principles, not Republicans with principles, because Republicans can be across the board. Like you can do party is like that. So I will amend my statement. One thing I did also want to touch base on too, though, is that it's intriguing to me with regard to election interference that people always refer to like January 6th as like the end all be all of like democracy damaging scenarios, right? And I can't help but like look back at January 6th.
Bad. The optics were bad.
And don't get me wrong, like I'm not in favor of January 6th was a terrible thing to me. Like, I think that those guys were moronic and idiotic. And I think I personally think that the moment they forced themselves past a barricade at the United States Capitol, they should have been kneecapped. I think they should have been rubber pellet kneecapped, and that would have ended that whole thing right away. That's just but I'm tough on crime, to be fair, right? I'm never been a softie on this sort of stuff. But now I compare that, though, that disorganization of January 6th, and realize that January 6th never had a prayer of actually dethroning the seat of power. Like, there was no way that even if they took the Capitol
it was a protest,
even if they captured Mike Pence, it's not like America would have been like, oh, you know what, you're right, we'll just let you be president. Like, that was never going to happen. It was never going to change who actually held the seat of power. However, Obama and his obstruction, and again, it's a little early to dig into this because it's still going on. It's an active investigation, but that is looking very organized and absolutely had the chance of disrupting the seat of power through impeachment, through disruption, through obstruction. I think that could have been absolutely twice, 3 times, 10 times as treasonous as any January 6th event ever had the prayer of being. So I just want you guys to think about that. And JC, it's a shame you missed most of we talked about your allegation that Trump stole the 2024 election. So we dug into that, and I think it's been thoroughly debunked now, but I want to keep digging. I haven't given up on it yet. But anyway, guys, that's what I had.
Yeah. I guess if JC says, maybe we should just Kamala Harris is looking good, where everybody is pining for a Kamala Harris president. No,
yeah, right. I miss her
Trump,
already.
but nobody wants Kamala Harris in the presidency. Like, come on,
Not even
like everybody who's got a Kamala sticker or Kamala thing in their front yard is embarrassed about that shit.
I'll shoot you, JC. I'll shoot you my stuff after I'll research it in depth today. I'll shoot you my stuff afterwards. But yeah, I definitely do appreciate you bringing the topic to me, though, guys. Just as a heads up, if you guys have topics you want us to look at, definitely bring them on. And like for those of you guys who are interested in being on the show, just like let's do it. Let's debate. Let's talk. Let's get it together. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you guys, and we do this every Wednesday and Saturday typically at 8. Today it was 9 o'clock, but thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time on Common Mansplaining.
Thank you. Keep it coming.
Keep it coming.